Thank you very much, Mr. John. We will now move on to panel discussion, the grid flexibility and renewables integration. The session will be moderated by Mr. Teruyuki Ono, Executive Director of Renewable Energy Institute. I will turn the microphone over to Mr. Ono. We would like to begin panel discussion, the grid flexibility and renewables integration. The topic is the role of the transmission grid, and we will discuss international grid, especially in Northeast Asia. In this session, we have 5 panelists, and we have 3 experts who are well versed in this topic. Professor Yokoyama from Waseda University, Professor Kikawa of Tokyo University of Science, and Professor Takahashi of Tsuru University. And we also have Dr. Kun, who just spoke from GEIDCO, and Mr. John of KEPCO. And with the 5 members on the panel, we would like to engage in discussion. And Professor Kikawa had a previous engagement, but we very much wanted Professor Kikawa to participate in the panel, so he will have to leave after the initial part of the discussion. The first, Professor Yokoyama of Waseda University, he's the expert on the topic, and he's also participating in GEIDCO activities. Professor Yokoyama, please. This is quite an honor to speak at this event. I'm first to speak amongst the panelists, so I would like to give you an outline of the role of transmission line in expanding international grid in Asia. 10 years ago, around 2010, Japan had a perfect generation mix where nuclear was 29% and we also had natural gas, and we had very balanced a mix of 5 energy sources. But unfortunately, because of tsunami in 2011 and earthquake in 2011, nuclear, one-fourth of nuclear was destroyed, and because of safety checks, nuclear power plant operation is suspended. It's only 1% of total electricity supply. 87% is from fossil fuel. In 1993, during the energy crisis, 73% came from fossil fuel, and that caused a huge stir. And at the time, replacement was nuclear energy, and nuclear was developed. But since then, it has already been 9 years after 2011, and this is OCTO, a neutral organization, but still somewhat sided towards electricity company. And this is a generation mix for 2020, and nuclear is only 1%. There will be only a few nuclear reactors working, so about 70% will be coming from fossil fuel. This is the same percentage as when we had energy crisis. Renewable energy will have to be increased, but it's 19% because of FIT and other problems. So the 6th option will have to be pursued. Renewable energy derived cheap, stable, imported energy will be necessary. And this has been discussed from some time. And around 2000, there was already this discussion from Sakhalin to bring new natural gas and to generate power in Ishikari in Hokkaido and to distribute power. And a feasibility study was conducted by trading company. It was economical, but did not materialize. And in 2007, electricity engineer Jack Casas wrote a book, Lost Routes, and ASEAN countries to be connected with a transmission grid was proposed to energize regional economy. And by connecting, there will be friendly ties amongst countries. But this was only in a book. And in 2011, after the tsunami, Tokyo University Professor Masuda, as I recall, and REI made this proposal. that is Asia Pacific Power Grid and Asia Super Grid. Earlier, Mr. John discussed that there was a proposal of Greenbelt from Korea, and in a way to put all of these together in 2015, SGCC proposed global energy interconnection. And this is expected to spread more widely throughout the world. And I believe that this is closest to reality. And this is on the cover of the brochure today. Mongolian wind and the Gobi Desert heat can be collected, and through ultra-high voltage transmission, electricity can be sent, and with frequency conversion with a DC transmission through UHV, electricity may be transported to Japan. And this is proven to be or analyzed to be economical. There are 3-hour time differential within this region. So in about 10 hours, we have sunshine in Japan, but actually over this whole area, there will be 13 hours of sunshine. So that's the benefit of time difference. And there is also price differential. 25 cents per kilowatt is Japan the most expensive. Hong Kong is also expensive, but it's 13 cents in Beijing, 6 cents in Ulaanbaatar, and cheaper in Nepal. So it is possible to make profit because of the price differentials between different countries. And to bring electricity from north is called R route, and from west is called K route. And there are various receiving points. And it is not enough to import. When it reaches onshore, it has to be brought to the center of the demand, such as Osaka and Nagoya. And in Japan, we have very vulnerable or weak network. And there is an enhancement of interconnection between Hokkaido and Honshu. And neutral organization OCCTO is trying to expand coordination amongst the transmission lines across regions. And so there should be cross-regional interconnection in Japan. This has to be enhanced. And both will have to be addressed, international interconnection as well as cross-regional interconnection in Japan. And this takes about 10 years. So it will take about 10 years for international interconnection to complete. Desert Tech was a successful example in Europe. Various regions have different natural energy, and by connecting with the transmission grid, there will be benefit. And there are several conditions that have to be satisfied. For example, in region, there are different characteristics, and there is distribution of renewable energy, and the countries that will be connected through interconnection should be politically, economically, and socially stable. And the countries will have to be in friendly relationship. And so 3 conditions will have to be satisfied. And this is my last slide. Electricity company is trying to provide a clean, low-cost energy. But in 2009, President Obama proposed smart grid. Using IoT and other technologies, consumers will be given information so they can save energy. And so energy efficiency, peak cut, and with a smart technology, effective utilization of facility will be possible, and DR, demand response, will be possible. When information is given, energy consumption will be made more efficient, and investment is also down. So smart grid did not take on very much. Asian countries are hit by disasters frequently, so energy distribution and autonomous energy network are necessary. So to establish resiliency, renewable energy will have to be introduced. The next generation network is necessary to introduce more renewable energy. And we can have the existing electricity network by electricity companies, but can establish new network. For example, in Europe, smart community is the concept, and there is also a distributed regional microgrid. This is METI's emphasis in Japan, and cross-regional interconnection through supergrid. By combining these 3 in a balanced way, we will be able to have reliable, low-cost, beneficial electricity supply. Thank you.
Professor Yokoyama, thank you very much. The From the international grid in Northeast Asia to the current status, it has been a very brief explanation. Next, I would like to call upon Professor Takahashi. REI from 2016, we've been having the study group on the international grid connection. Professor Takahashi has been the founding member and contributed greatly to the report as well. Professor Takahashi, the floor is yours. Thank you. As was introduced, my name is Takahashi. As Mr. Ono mentioned, from me, looking at the past 3 years, since there have been 3 reports, Professor Oyama has served as the chair, I was the acting chair, and Professor Kikawa also participated more recently. So very briefly, those of you who are here in the seminar, some of you may be very familiar with this, but very briefly, the first and second and the third reports has just become available. I'd like to introduce them to you. But energy security has been the biggest bottleneck, as I understand. So I'd like to offer my comment. First and the second report, I'll be very brief. In 2017, in the very first year, the European cases, the most advanced countries, we looked at them, the foundation of an international grid. We checked that. 3 E's, as you know: economy, efficiency, and stable supply. And also, could serve as the measures to control the variation. Several years ago, we went to the UK, and the UK government said that the international grid to fulfill all the 3 E's. This is rather unusual, be it fossil fuel or renewables. Without subsidies, investment cannot be made. But international grid connections that will stand without any subsidies. Looking at Europe, more than 100 years ago, they have been expanding. But more recently, they have this organization called ENTSO-E. In a more planned manner, they've been expanding the international grid. What about the Northeast Asia? GEIDCO and KEPCO shared their views. But in Northeast Asia, again, there is a great potential. Mongolia, Russia, they have a great potential. Chinese and South Korean governments have been very forthcoming in tackling this international grid connection. There are certain issues, challenges, but I think there is a great possibility, and that's mentioned in the report. Having said that, this has been just a general discussion. So now, looking at the 2018, the second report, specifically, where do we want to establish it? What will be the actual cost? We did this study just 1 year ago at a certain international conference. I remember that we made a report between Japan and Russia. 4 routes are looked at, and again, between South Korea and Japan, 4 possible routes have been studied. The shortest one between Japan and Russia, the Sakhalin and Wakkanai, connecting that's 161 kilometers. It's actually 40 kilometers physically, but in terms of connecting the subsea, that 161 kilometers. If it's long, Kashiwazaki-Kariwa, direct connection to then about 1,200 kilometers. Between South Korea and Japan, the shortest distance, that's Kyushu and Busan, then a little more than 200 kilometers. And in Reinan, then about a little more than the 600 kilometers. So you can see that this is the estimated cost. Just looking at the international connections, that's the 110 billion to 430 billion, or Japan and South Korea 120 billion to 246 billion. But you need to enhance the ones in the domestic area. So given that it's economically feasible and the investment can be recouped, that's the part of the conclusion. If you look at this graph, just for your reference, looking at overseas, this is really a data. We are looking at the export rate and import rate, 2 axes, versus against the electric consumption. What about the rate or the amount of the electric export and import? You can see that it's almost on the diagonal. Europe is most advanced, As you can see in the rectangle, that's 13%. 13%, that's the Europe. A little more than 10% is exchanged within Europe. The biggest part, Austria, Denmark, these are some countries that have high figures. So what I'm saying is that the European countries, green countries, are advanced. At the same time, there's a kind of a good balance in Japan. 99% of the fossil fuel is imported, but that's simply not possible in the world of electricity because you want to have a certain amount of power plants. So extreme import, extreme export, except for extremely small countries, that's simply not possible. More or less export-oriented companies, more or less import-oriented companies, while there are some differences, but you can see that overall there's a good balance. South Korea and Japan, we don't have international connection, so 0% and 0%. That's our situation. Now, moving on to the third report, those of you who have not read it, I would like to encourage you to read it. Two main things. First, cost-benefit analysis, especially the analysis on benefits. With the tie line between South Korea and Japan, looking at that as a case study, what are the actual benefits or what are the demerits or disadvantages? The desktop analysis was made within South Korea, for instance. South to north, the power flows because the Seoul is located in the northern part of the country. But if they can export power to Japan, there will be availability in the South Korea. Perhaps that could result in higher amount of renewables. Now, Kyushu, they have started curtailment already. That means that there is some limit in transmitting to Honshu main island. But if they could send it out to South Korea, then they will have less curtailment. So those are some possibilities as a result of the study. Next, about energy security related study. That's part of the big achievement of the third report. As we look at the fossil fuel era, the oil shock was a typical example. Export might be stopped or suspended while we have certain concerns. If you look at it in the world of electricity, maybe it's different. Or going forward, in the era focused on renewables, then for that renewables introduction, we have this international connection. This is indispensable, and for energy security, this would be a positive thing. I have been asked to stop, and let me offer my comment. Those of you from China and South Korea, when I offer this, why in Japan you don't have any momentum? South Korea and China have been making so much effort. They chide me, and then I come up with 4 reasons. Political reason, security perspective. At the moment, between South Korea and Japan, there are certain issues, problems. Politically, it's difficult. That's one of the reasons. Secondly, policy-related reasons. Those of you who know that domestically, Japan is trying to tackle this electricity reform, and so connecting with overseas countries that might be difficult in the eyes of bureaucrats. Third, industrial reason, because power companies have to make efforts if it's really about international connection. But from the power companies, it's not unbundled other than TEPCO. So having cheap energy available from overseas, we cannot live with it. That might be the response. Fourth, societal reason. Those of you who are here are different, but from the ordinary people, importing power, importing electricity is out of their minds. To begin with, they don't know that's possible. Perhaps many of you don't know. So REI, I would like to ask the Institute to really make efforts. We have been dependent on the import of oil and natural gas. So this is feasible. You need to communicate that. Last page. So based on that, the biggest concern comes from the energy security. So I would like to rebut. Let me rebut. First, Japan is described as an importing country. At the moment, our self-sufficiency rate is just 10% because of the suspension of the nuclear power generation. Because of that, we need to increase the amount of renewables significantly. And to that end, what's necessary is perhaps international grid connection. So change the way you think to enhance self-sufficiency ratio. You need international grid connection. Having said that, Russia may stop exporting. I mean, they have done that for exporting natural gas. You might think about that, but in Japan, the 9% is what we have been importing from Russia for the past 8 years. Don't forget that. Looking at Germany, close to 60%, they have been importing natural gas from Russia. Western Europe is dependent on Russia in terms of LNG. Some people are concerned, but has Russia stopped the export? That hasn't happened. Strategically, Russia has been very strategic. In some cases, they stop the export. So the former Soviet Union countries, they might stop the export of natural gas, but other countries like Japan, like in economic power, it's impossible. It's almost impossible that they're going to stop exporting to a country like Japan. Lastly, the energy security, electricity, it's different too. They have a certain level of supply capacity. 2 gigawatts international connection line. Suppose that's established, but that's only 1.3% of the 150 gigawatts demand. And with different multiple tie lines, if you create that, there are almost no risks. So that's my rebuttal against the concerns based on the energy security. Thank you.
機関先生に最初のパネルディスカッションの
Dr. Kikawa will speak first. He won't be able to stay on for the entire program. So during the presentation, perhaps you can speak about things that you intended to talk about during the panel.
皆さんこんにちは。
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. The REI Asia Supergrid study group is something that I joined in the middle of the process, and I've learned a great deal. Asian Supergrid and its impact on Japan's utility business. We believe ASG can trigger changes of the utility business in Japan. Last year, the Japanese government came up with a second energy plan. Most of it is worthless, but there is one which was of value. That is in 2050 to make renewable energy the main power source. That was the first time that was included in the basic plan. But it's easier said than done. There are two types of renewable energy. First is the better renewable energy. That's geothermal, hydro, and biomass. And it doesn't impact the grid much, and it's of high quality. With regard to geothermal, it's near national parks, so there's a lot of regulation. And the onsen, the hot spring bath inns might object. And most of them, geothermal has been developed. There's very little room for further development. And biomass is such that the Japanese forestry business has weakened. So domestic wood from thinning cannot be used. So you have to depend on imported wood. But if you import this, unlike the other renewable energy, there's a cost incurred in foreign currency denominated terms. So there's not much room for growth. And then there's type B, for which cost is coming down largely. There's a large room for growth, but it's very variable. And so it might impact the grid. So it's hard to use. That's wind and solar. How to grow this would be the key point. Basically,
The bottleneck would be the transmission and transformer network. This has not been discussed much, but nuclear power, you see a lot of decommissioning, and perhaps you can use the decommissioned facilities. And normally, the power utilities do not create, but maybe that's questionable. I'll talk about this later. And whether to use energy that's produced locally, or if you decompose water and you decompose into hydrogen and others and you transport. If you could do all of this, perhaps this type B, the harder to use type, the intransigent type can be used more. In 311, there were 54 under construction, and there were 54 which were constructed. 3 were under construction. Presently, 9 are online. And according to the basic plan, by 2030, they want 22 to 22% by 2030. And the capacity utilization should be 80% in order to enable that. If you read the report with care, the decommissioning is proceeding smoothly. From 311, it's been 9 years, and the Regulatory Commission has seen 9 which are in operation, and I believe that 3 will be decommissioned. And so with all this, we want to have 30 in operation. And you need to inspect nuclear power plants once in 9 months. At the time of the incident, there were plants which were not inspected once. And to realize 80% of capacity utilization is very, very difficult. So this 20 to 22% of nuclear power, nobody believes this is possible. I said that it's difficult, but I feel that it's not possible. So if that's the case, going forward in the power world, I believe there'll be 3 business models. This is what utility, the industry normally thinks. Kyushu, Kansai, and Shikoku has put if they have put the nuclear power plants online, they will win in the end. But in the long end, they will not become a winner, as the case was before 311. It's not viable to do business depending on nuclear power. The existing nuclear power plant may be cheap, but you don't know when they'll come to a stop. It's a very variable power source. So nuclear power dependent management is such that it's not really viable in the future. And the second point, there are companies like Chubu or J-Power that don't need nuclear power, and they might sell and dispose of their nuclear power, but they're dependent on fossil fuel large-size power sources. And the utility power industries are such that you need to consume as soon as you generate, and that's very difficult, so that there are no blackouts. You have to adjust the power generation, and the network management is the core competence. So avoiding blackouts is something that needs to be in the center of the minds of the power utilities. The Power Utility Council says that transmission must be made over a wider area, and distribution must be more widely distributed. So distribution might be unbundled, and it will be put together with retail. So then the third business model will be the distributed power source model, which might become mainstream. And the TEPCO power grid is of that sort. And they are considering doing without nuclear power. And with transmission widening, with getting together with Tohoku in eastern Japan, wide area TSO will materialize. And in the western part, the Chubu and Kyushu will form another TSO. And that will be the future engine of the utility industry, and that is the future business model. So the Asia supergrid, when this emerges in this context, it has a major impact. The source of public utilities is not generation, but it's network management. Network-focused business might be triggered by the ASG. And if you use direct current, and from Kashiwazaki to the vicinity of Tokyo, if you have a high voltage direct current, which Chubu does, that would be very efficient. And you can tie it to the data center directly. And perhaps the new scheme would be using high voltage direct current. And with the flexibility of the network, renewable energy percentage will go up. So considering these 3 points, the ASG potentially will become a major game changer. That alone would not be a game changer, but it will trigger a game change. So thank you very much. Shei and kamsahamnida. Thank you.
どうも、吉川先生ありがとうございました。
Thank you, Professor Kikawa. Maybe you have run out of time. Thank you very much for speaking despite your very busy schedule, Professor Kikawa. Please send a round of applause once again. And now we would like to move on to the discussion amongst the panelists. I would like to welcome Professor Takahashi, Professor Yokoyama, and Dr. Kun and Mr. John to come to the stage.
So
we have about 30 minutes for discussion. Going forward in Japan, as we pursue Asian supergrid, what do we have to resolve in terms of issues? We would like to focus only on those issues. But as it was mentioned in the keynote, international grid is developed in North America, Europe, and in Asia, but North Asia lags behind. And within North Asia, from 2016, China, Korea, Japan, and Russia connection was proposed, but in Japan, discussion is not progressing. But in China and Korea, ahead of Japan, a project is about to start. So Japan alone is left behind. So first of all, Dr. Wan Kun, earlier, I think you had to speed up because of time constraints. So could you supplement about China-Korea interconnection?
Thank you very much for the question. I would like to introduce some more detail about the China and Korea interconnection projects. Actually, in 2016, after we established GEIDCO, we already worked with like Korea Electric Power Corporation and SoftBank Group and the Russia Power Grid Company, and all these organizations signed MOU to promote Northeast Power Grid interconnection. So that's the first step. And then in 2017, the year after, we signed the MOU, and GEIDCO, SGCC, and KEPCO, we signed agreement to push forward the China-Korea interconnection project. That means we have clear direction, we have the picture, we have the clear plan to go. And thirdly, in 2018, April, we have started the pre-feasibility study, and the GEIDCO, SGCC, KEPCO, we work together. And we established a work group to start the pre-feasibility study and the plan. And afterwards, we finished the pre-feasibility study research, and in September, we organized many enterprises from industry, especially equipment, submarine cable company, and to discuss especially flexible DC, all this technology to solve the technology problem. last year, October, the Ministry of Business and Resource of Korea has expressed their support to China and Korea Interconnection project. So we push forward one important step forward. And this year, from January, June, July, we organized 3 times feasibility study seminars, focus more on technology, manufacturing, all this kind of specific issue. So during last 3 years, we have made a lot of efforts and made a lot of progress in the interconnection project between Korea and China. So from this progress, we can know that firstly, you have clear picture. You have clear, you must be very clear where you to go, and then you have your research and specific plan, and then we build up the work group to move it step by step. And for the government side, I think in some country we can push from the government side to business side, but in some country we can push from business side, organizational side to government. So it's not one way; it's interactive way. So I think there are a lot of study and a lot of experience we can learn from this progress. Okay.
はい、どうもありがとうございます。本当にもう具体的にですね、どうやったらもう
Thank you very much. So even the details about the numerics, this is well thought out. So Mr. John from KEPCO, would you like to add?
I'm Seok Jung from Korea Electric Power Corporation. And thank you for Ms. Wang, also because she's explained about Korea-China interconnection project very in detail. So I don't want to repeat again. So I just like to some important points for our project. Just as she mentioned, Korea-China power grid interconnection project is already we finished the review study last year, and we just reaffirmed the feasibility of the project. So we are pretty sure for this project is very beneficial for each countries. And the important thing what I would like to emphasize is we are about to signing the JDA, which means joint development agreement, which means not like a study level, just really we are trying to entering the business level, which means we are putting the money in near future. So this is what I would like to emphasize. And one thing is we started this project together with Japan. Of course, the company is a SoftBank Group, but we started together. But now, between Korea and China, is the project really implemented. So this is important thing what I would like to say. And on the other hand, to Japan, and Japan and Korea is like isolated countries in terms of power system. So if the power system is like connected with the neighboring countries, it will have to increase renewable energy and make efficient use of it. So finally, even if small amount of electricity could be reliably integrated with other countries, it would be possible to find out a win-win business model that benefit not only for export country or company, but also importing country or company, and also the public people as well, not only companies and country. So anyway, this is, I'm not sure everybody has different ideas, but at least it is kind of worth to do and try to challenge for this project in our future and for implement the energy transition in the future. So thank you very much.
はい、ありがとうございました。韓国
Thank you very much. So between China and Korea, the current status were presented by the speakers from each country. Now, what should Japan do? There are various benefits of international grid, as discussed by previous speakers, and we are discussing these benefits with stakeholders and researchers, but energy security remains an issue. depending on the circumstances, although it depends on the circumstances, but sometimes we are not completely, we may not be completely friendly with China, Korea, Russia. There may be such unfortunate circumstances. And can we be dependent on these countries for supply of electricity? That seems to be the biggest bottleneck in this discussion in Japan. So I would like to address that. Professor Takahashi discussed this. So Professor Yokoyama, could you comment on this? Professor Kiko, please, correction.
On hearing this, when China and Korea connected, the only advanced country which will be isolated will be Japan, so I'm concerned. This large-scale business is always accompanied by supply risk and demand risk and financing risk and political risk, all kinds of risks. Now, with regard to this project, however, the buyer would be Japan. So Japan's energy situation is such that renewable energy level, cheap, stable power is something that Japan definitely wants. Japan will definitely buy and will not try to seek for reduced prices. The next is supply and financing. SoftBank and KEPCO and other parties are very stable. There's no concern. What remains is political risk. In Europe, in desert Africa, UK, France, Italy, Spain, Germany, 100 years ago, 70 years ago, these were countries in opposition. But when the power utilities were tied, they became very friendly. And the power supply was never severed. Gas pipelines were closed, but power was never cut off. The power source was never cut off. So in that sense, you can take that example to say that this sort of thing will not happen in countries such as Asia. There are attempts. There are no more attempts to try to bring examples of 70 years or 100 years to undermine the relationship. So I believe this will realize.
Thank you very much. Energy security is not limited to Japan or North Asia, but I'm sure in other regions this must be one of the points of discussion. So earlier, or I would like to turn to Dr. Kun from GEIDCO. GEIDCO is about international interconnection. So energy security, whether that comes up as a question as you pursue international interconnection. So far, in your experience, what kind of discussion have you had outside of Japan, and how is GEIDCO addressing that?
Okay, that's a good question, because energy security not only concern of one country or another. Many countries they have that kind of concern. I would try to answer this question from three aspects. Firstly, some people may worry about the interconnection to influence power supply security. Yeah, when countries for example, for country, they connect with each other. For countries, selling power can get economic benefits, yeah, and also they can have other development for if they go to sell the power to other countries. And for countries receiving power, let's say country B can solve their energy problems through the interconnection. So it's not one party. It's not one party solely relying on another one. So there's a two-way interaction, two-way dependence. Okay. So if one country cut down or break down the power from another country, that means the selling country will lose their economic benefits and also, more importantly, their image and their trust in the international cooperation. So this intangible loss will influence a lot, not only in the economic benefits they can have from the selling power. So that's the first point I try to make. The secondly, when we connect more countries together and form a network, basically the country use the multi-way to solve their energy problem and to meet the energy demand. So actually we know that storage and flexible DC and intelligent dispatch, all this technology can help you to control and control the dispatch and the power grid operation and the system in different way compared to the traditional way. So we all can use all kind of technology to increase the security. Okay, that's the second point I try to make. Thirdly, many members in GEIDCO are from IT and internet industry. Every time when we talk about and discuss the power grid interconnection security problem, professional for this industry, they always say 25 years ago when they went to other country to speak to talk to with the government or business entity about the internet interconnection, they all have such kind of concern and worry about the security. But nowadays, we know all internet are interconnected across the world and globally. We still need to have consider about the data loss, information security, and other risks when we use the internet. But it won't influence our interconnection in the internet. So I think that's similar to the power grid interconnection as well. So we need to have the power grid interconnection. And on the other hand, we can try to find a different way and different technology to solve this kind of problem and to control the risks. Yeah, okay. That's the point I will try to make. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。多様なオプションを持つその
Thank you very much. To increase the options and mutual dependence, I think that was what it's about. And the same issue, I'd like to ask John-san. Between Japan and Korea, it's a very difficult relationship that we have at the moment. But Japan, Korea, international grid and transmission, is there a discussion about energy security in your country? Could you talk about the situation in your country?
About energy security, really, overall. So I would like to a little bit more focused on that Northeast Asian power grid interconnection, especially between Korea and Japan interconnections. So I would like to focus out a little bit 2 points. Just first one is at the first step we are planning to interconnect between with China and with Japan. It's around 2 gigawatts level. So which means around less than 2% of total Korean power grid generation capacity and around 1% of Japanese total power grid power generation capacity. So which means it's really a small portion at the first step. So this is, I would say, it's almost no effect. Even it happens some accident, cutting or something like that. And the second one is I'm from utility company, so when we study for these things like connecting the grid or something, so we are and care about the situation or regard that the outage, including a cutting problem. So we already prepare or thinking or analysis the situation that power grid is cutting suddenly. So just I would like to say, so we prepare, and this at the first steps 2 gigawatt is really small, so we don't have to really worry about the interconnection at the capacity level and now. But of course we have to carefully examine the security problem in the future when the capacity of the power grid interconnection gets larger. Of course we have to care about, but at the first step I think it's still okay, and we already have done about the power system analysis. So, and finally, but however, in order to ensure this part more clearly, it is important to establish a comprehensive relationship between countries, not only technical cooperations, but also intergovernmental cooperations as well. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。正直この
Thank you very much. Japan-Korea, China-Japan-Korea interconnection may develop quite fast, but initially, 2 gigawatt number was mentioned. 150 gigawatt, maybe the maximum in Japan. So at least in the beginning, if we should not cite energy security as a reason to not start interconnection. Professor Takahashi, in the third report discussed this issue and of energy security. And after listening to other speakers, what is your view now of the energy security issue? Well, I've made 3 rebuttals, 3 reasons for rebuttal in my presentation earlier. Objectively speaking, or if we should start to have discussion in very objective, calm fashion. We should not be too emotional, and we should not reject a discussion. But maybe that had been the case before in some cases. But as it was mentioned by other speakers, there are almost only benefits if we think about this objectively. As I also mentioned myself, 90% of the energy is imported by Japan, and a part of that import it can be replaced by electricity. 9% of LNG is imported from Russia, so it can be reduced to 7% of LNG imported from Russia and 2% in the form of electricity. And that doesn't change the total 9% import from Russia. Instead, we will have 2 alternatives, LNG and electricity route. So in that sense, it's a distribution of risk in terms of energy security risk. So this puts Japan in a stronger position. For that reason as well, there are almost no demerits. It will only improve the situation and not deteriorate. And there will also be reciprocity or a mutual exchange. Oftentimes, the gas will be more inexpensive in Russia. So most of the time, Japan may be importing, but depending on the case, depending on the situation, gas may be imported or exported between the 2 countries. When we had massive blackout in Hokkaido, then I'm sure Russia will be willing to provide electricity to Hokkaido. So in that sense, it will be beneficial in terms of energy security as well. So rather than depending too much on one country, and in electricity that is not likely. So I think there are far more positives in international connection. And in the world, clearly, ultimately, the objective is to have 100% renewable energy. Some people might say that this is a pie in the sky, but at least a 50% renewable energy percentage will be agreed to. And if 50% is variable renewable, then there should be a strong connection of the networks to maintain that percentage. And that is the common sense in Europe. So as Korea increases renewable energy percentage, in serious tone, KEPCO people say that there has to be interconnection with Japan. And if Japan is earnest in increasing the share of renewable to 20, 30, 40, 50%, then we have to seriously consider interconnection with Korea and China. So if we apply logic, then there are almost only positives in interconnection and almost no negatives. So as a researcher, I would like to make this argument, make the case for interconnection. And I hope that politicians and government officials will also discuss this in positive way. We should learn from Western examples and example from between China and Korea. That will be a starting point.
Thank you. Rather than the demerits, also in energy security, the merits outweigh demerits. Professor Yokoyama, in your presentation from 2000, in the industry, in the businesses, they started addressing this Asian international connection. Last spring, we had a symposium like this. there are people who are from the industry, and then this person actually raised his hand. At the time, they couldn't get the national government support in 2000, so it stopped. If that had been completed in 2011, when there was a power loss, power blackout, perhaps there would have been the power supply from Russia, so it would not have resulted in such a blackout. That impressed me so much. We are running out of time, but we have another theme. Starting from next year, there's going to be an unbundling from power generation and transmission, and there is going to be more introduction of renewable energy. So there will be changes in the power businesses. So the international grid connection, what will be the significance of that in the changing environment? First, Professor Yokoyama, the floor is yours.
When unbundling advances, it'll be a wide area, so interconnection would be easier. The bureaucracy wants to protect power, so they're not too willing. The power utilities are seeing from 16 to 25 yen. When something 10 yen comes in, that'll disrupt prices. So they are also unwilling, and they are not forward-looking. So the power utilities themselves, if they participated in these projects, they can procure power cheaply and sell cheaply. 2 gigawatts is 1.1% or so. It's pretty much of a profit. 1 hour, 2 million yen, that's the profit. In a year, that's 50 million. Yearly, this will be 20 billion. So the project was 150 billion yen. So several years would be enough for them to recover, so they can overcome risk. And so we definitely want to realize this.
Thank you very much for discussing actual numbers and profits. Professor Takahashi, please. Every year, I visit Europe several times a year. There are TSOs, and I have visited the TSOs, many TSOs. And in Europe, there are very positive. There are very positive actors, proactive actors about interconnection, namely TSOs, and there is unbundling of ownership in many European countries, and equity-wise, TSOs are independent. They say interconnection, and they are enhancing international connections, and they are able to get financing very easily. And that is naturally the case because the business can be expanded through international connection, and the cost is recouped from electricity user charge. So this is a very stable business. Ratepayers are paying, and so the same should happen in Japan. Professor Kikawa said very important point towards the end of his presentation. Business model for power company in Japan should be centering around transmission distribution networks, and the key will be international network. And we have to develop such environment as soon as possible in Japan. Then for electricity company power generators and for transmission companies, that will be a positive. And for Japan as a whole, because of increase in renewable energy and lower electric tariff, that will be beneficial. I do not know whether there are people from power companies, transmission companies, but they should be the ones who should take strongest interest in international connection. And I hope that they are very willing to look at this business potential. That will be the biggest strategy for growth.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kumi participated in the keynote as well as in the panel discussion. You are from GEIDCO, but actually you're originally from the SGCC, State Grid Connection. That's biggest, or even in the world, the biggest transmission company. So from that capacity as well, if you look at the international grid connection, what is the significance for the utility companies, power companies? I would like you to give us a comment, and since this is going to be the last round, please give us your message to the people of Japan.
So, for the other utility and the power companies, the suggestion, actually, the global energy interconnection or the interconnection in some area, because we need to do it step by step. From the recent year, when SGCC or other companies join our platform to push forward the international connection, there are at least some benefits for example, technology, because if we need to connect with different countries, we need to consider the dispatch. Okay, we need to, that's one of the key issue we need to consider. So SGCC and other utility companies need to consider that to improve their intelligence dispatch management operation. That's one issue. So, and also the storage side for power grid to accelerate the clean energy. So that's very important as well. In China last year, we have the largest storage station for the power grid side. Actually, it's developed very quickly. So all this technology can benefit the power grid company. So in that way, if you join this platform, if you push it forward for company, they can be very much technology driven and innovation, which is very, very important for them to be competitive in the world. I think it's so. If you pass the time, and maybe you may lose some very important opportunity. And also for mechanism, because we need to interconnect different countries, we need to build up different market mechanism. When we almost always talk about the cross-border electricity market, actually we have many different ways to build up the market mechanism, which is also important for power grid and other utility company. So on one hand, you can improve and you can have your technology driven. On the other hand, you need to have different mechanisms. So if you have these two ways to develop, I think up to a number of years for for companies who participate in this interconnection, they will be very competitive in the world. Okay, thank you.
ありがとうございます。では最後に、KEPCO の
Thank you very much. From KEPCO, Mr. Jones. You're the only power company in Korea and the largest. The international transmission network, the significance of that and hopes for Japan. Could you refer to this?
In Japan, the proportion of renewable energy will significantly increasing, and legal unbundling will be completed next year, and there will be big and small changes in the electricity business. Renewable generation companies will be able to use the grid more easily, and utility companies will need to take measures to respond to the growing number of renewables. So moreover, under the Paris Climate Change Accord, the energy sector will have no choice but to promote energy transition through renewable energy expansion policies. In this regard, if cross-border interconnections are established between countries, such as PSS, we can expect not only securing system flexibility in these areas, but also various business opportunities using interconnections. Additionally, important thing is mutual benefits, not only for one party or one country. So we need to find the best business model for the power grid interconnection. And finally, power grid interconnection is not only for economical benefit for the utility company, but also it is also to secure the energy flexibility for growing the renewable energy in the future. Thank you.
ありがとうございました。ちょっと話それるようですけども、今日の
Thank you very much. It may sound like a deviation, but you may have heard this news this morning about GHG concentration this year. This is the record high. So we have to increase renewable energy. Power company will have to use more and supply more renewable energy. So we cannot avoid this topic of interconnection. And the decarbonization policy is promoted by the government, but future technologies such as nuclear fusion is included in government's policy, but what is more imminent, international grid connection, is not mentioned, which is quite odd. And towards decarbonization, we have to look at international grid connection. And as Dr. Ku mentioned, this is the trend in the worldwide business. So in international transmission, for Japanese power companies to not participate will mean that they will be losing opportunities for new business and for business expansion. We were not able to cover everything in this short limited time. We would like to close this panel. Please send a round of applause to panelists. Thank you very much.
皆様ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much.